Kalispera σας. Good evening. I am Lina Kassianidou. I am the director of the Archaeological Research Unit. I am very happy to see many new faces, which we haven't seen before, so welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. Your Excellency, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we host a special event. The lecture by Dr. Maria Christidis from the University of Graz unites three institutions, the University of Cyprus and its Archaeological Research Unit, the Department of Antiquities, and the Embassy of Austria. This is a great opportunity to celebrate the initiative of the European Union to name 2018 as the Year of European Cultural Heritage. We thank the Ambassador of Austria and Cyprus, Dr. Eva Maria Ziegler, for the idea to co-organize this event, as well as for the wine reception that will be offered by the Austrian Embassy at the end of the lecture. We all three see this liaison as an opportunity that might promote more collaborations between Austria and Cyprus in the field of archaeology. Just last September, the University of Graz hosted an important international conference dedicated to Cypriot archaeology, and this shows a vivid scientific interest in the archaeology of the island. Research on various subjects of Aegean and Cypriot archaeology has been conducted in some of the most renowned Austrian universities, such as the universities of Graz itself, Vienna, Innsbruck, and Salzburg. Several Austrian colleagues from the older generation, such as Fritz Schachermayer and Sigrid Degger-Jalkotzi, but also from the younger generation, have systematically worked over the years on various issues of Cypriot archaeology, and we sincerely hope that this tradition will go on. Austria houses 10 archaeological collections in various museums, such as the University of Graz and in the Kunsthistorisches Museum of Vienna, where also the extraordinary Amazon sarcophagus from Soli, bought by the Habsburgs in the 17th century, is exhibited. There are 7 more Cypriot collections of Cypriot antiquities in the Museum of Sigmund Freud in Vienna. Please allow me to say a few words now about tonight's speaker. Dr. Maria Christidis is a lecturer and research assistant at the Institute of Archaeology of the University of Graz in Austria. She comes from Florina in northern Greece and studied archaeology at the University of Thessaloniki, and with this piece of information will fully understand why she has chosen to study Attic vase painting. In 2005, she received her PhD in classical archaeology from the University of Graz with a thesis entitled Female Nudity in Greek Art from the Archaic to the End of the Classical Period. This is a very interesting subject indeed, which has to be the topic of her next lecture here. She has excavated in Austria and in Greece, in the Peloponnese, in collaboration with the Austrian Institute of Athens. Dr. Maria Christidis has various responsibilities and duties at the University of Graz. She is responsible for the curatorial and educational work associated with the archaeological collections of the Institute there. Among her responsibilities is the organization of exhibition and of educational programs for children. As you can guess from the title of her lecture, she is a specialist in the study of vase painting, and in fact she is now in Cyprus studying the red figure Attic vases from Cypriot sites in order to publish them in a volume of the very prestigious series of Corpus Vasorum Antiquorum. This is something missing from the literature, and we must congratulate Dr. Christidis for this initiative. She has already published a volume in the Corpus Vasorum series on the collection of the Institute of the University of Graz. She has also published several papers on various topics related to vase painting and iconography, such as Theseus, Menes, Divine Children, and the Cult of Artemis in Attica. So we are very happy that she's here to share with us her new research. Before giving her the floor, however, I would like to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Ziegler to come and offer a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Hieronymido Solimido, Professor Papasavas, Dr. Kassianidou, thank you for hosting us. Austria has always had a soft spot for Hellenism and the history of these Mediterranean countries. If you walk through the center of Vienna, you will see that on many buildings, the most prominent example, of course, being the Parliament building, which was designed by the Danish architect Theophil Hansen, who also did quite a bit of constructing in Athens. It is thus with great pleasure that I stand here today in this wonderful venue of the University of Cyprus. For more than 20 years, the Institute of Archaeology at Karl Franzens University of Graz, supported by the Austrian Science Fund, has been dedicating, amongst others, its research on Cyprus. And I also invite you to go to Graz, because it's really, for me, the most Mediterranean city in Austria. I think it's the southernmost capital. I don't know whether Klagenfurt is even more, but I mean, more or less. And I think you can really see already a Mediterranean spirit. So maybe that also influences the Institute of Archaeology in the city. The main partners in cooperation tonight are here the Cyprus Department of Antiquities, the University of Cyprus, the Cypriot Ministry of Education and Culture, the Leventis Municipal Museum, as well as many other institutions across Europe. The Institute's research is being conducted mainly by Dr. Gabriele Koiner and Dr. Nicole Reitinger. Starting point were terracottas of Eastern Cyprus, sculptures from Nicosia and the surrounding areas, many of which can be found in the Cyprus Museum. The Institute organized the International Conference Hellenistic Cyprus in 2010, followed by a national workshop in 2016, and the International Conference Classical Cyprus in September 2017, which led to a number of very important publications. Dr. Maria Christidis, whom I heartily welcome here today, and to whom the Embassy is very grateful for accepting the invitation, has come all the way from Austria to give a blink of the insights of her own research, which is consecrated to Cyprus' Attic pottery and vases. She will give us answers to the questions, what do vases depict, and what kind of information do they give us on the aspects of life in this period of time? As you already heard, the fruits of her labor will soon be published in the Corpus Vasorum Antiquorum in cooperation with the Austrian Academy of Science. Before I call Dr. Christidis to the podium, I would like to thank Professor Vasiliki Kassianidou, the director here of the research unit, Professor George Papasavas for helping us with the organization and hosting us today, and of course Dr. Marina Solomido Hieronimido and her team for your valuable support. Thank you all for coming. I wish you an interesting conference and hope that you will stay with us for a glass of wine afterwards. Thank you.
Your Excellency, dear Ambassador, dear Professor of Classical Archaeology, dear Director of the Department of Antiquities and Cyprus Museum, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here, and it is a pleasure for me to present you one of my favorite subjects, the Attic vases, vases that narrate. Why did ancient painters choose as a poor material to paint on? Why did Joachim Winckelmann, on the top, the father of archaeology, write a book dedicated to Greek painted vases? Nowadays, why are so many lectures about Greek pottery and vase painting? Why does a pottery archive in Oxford, named after his founder, Sir John Beazley, exist? But let's start from the beginning. During the Renaissance, the early Renaissance, the collecting of ancient art became an important element in the rebirth of the spirit of antiquity. The first references to collections containing painted pottery relate to the Medici collections in Florence. Since the 15th century, painted vases were part of private collections, the so-called cabinet of curiosities or cabinet of wonder. Two pictures. We can see two pictures of them. In 1764, two events took place that were to change the collecting and studying of Greek vases profoundly. Firstly, Joachim Winckelmann published the Geschichte des Kunstaltertums, through which the theory of the Greek origin of the paint vases reached a larger public. Secondly, William Hamilton arrived as British envoy extraordinary in Naples and immediately began to collect antiquities. Soon after this, a publication of Hamilton's collection was released, and part of his collection was sold to the British Museum in London. So the vases from Hamilton's collection made up the core of the first collection outside Italy. During the 18th and 19th centuries, all great European museums set up a vase collection. A really important innovation during the late 19th century was the study of the objects of these collections. The first and oldest research project on ancient Greek pottery was organized by Edmond Potier in Paris in 1990 from the Union Académique Internationale, the Corpus Vasorum Antiquorum project, or CVA. He published the first volume with vases of the Louvre collection. Today, this project covers a compendium of more than 100,000 vases located in collections of 26 participating countries. In Austria, the vases of Kunsthistorisches Museum have been published in 6 volumes, as well as the University Collection of Graz has published another volume 4 years ago. In Cyprus, 2 volumes have been already published by Professor Vasos Karagiorgis, and our aim is to continue this tradition, investigating the Attic vases of Cyprus Museum and publishing them in another Corpus Vasorum Antiquorum volume. Today, we are concerned with vases that have figure decoration, and mainly those who were produced in Athens, known as Athenian or Attic pottery. Athenian potters neither invented pottery nor the potter's wheel. But thanks to the quality of its clay and the skill of its potters, Athens produced for several centuries ceramics without equivalent in the Greek world. Figure-decorated pottery goes back to the Bronze Age. We can see here colorful and highly decorative vases made by the Minoans of Crete. Later, the Mycenaean Greek potters of the mainland learned from the Minoans. At the beginning, the pottery is influenced by Minoan styles, but later the decoration is stylized rather than naturalistic. During the next period, the 10th century, the potters drew carefully and with newly devised multiple brushes on something like canvas. They produced the concentric and circles and semicircles characteristic of the proto-geometric period. This. In course of time, and during the next period, in 9th century, during the geometric period, there was in Athens a significant increase in the rates of patterns on the vases. These geometric patterns are quite complex. We can see it on this vase. We can see crosses, many devices filling with hatching, fishbone patterns, and also the introduction for the first time of the typically Greek meander. In the 18th century, human and animal figures are added to the decoration. Increasing wealth encouraged increasing display. Festivals became more spectacular and recitals of poetry more splendid. The Olympic Games were founded at this time, this century, and Homer wrote his poets. Potters, therefore, had to provide the monuments for the new age. Some of these vases were huge, like this amphora, this vase, found in Keramaikos of Athens. Though the vase itself is very large, the patterns decorating it have been kept small, divided the surface in horizontal zones. The most prominent part of the vase, the area between the handles, has received special treatment. We can see, here is a tile photo, we can see a burial scene, a prophecies. The corpse lies in the center, the throat raised above it, so that the body can be seen. 4 mourners sit or kneel in front of it, and another figures stand to the left and to the right. By the end of the 8th century BC, the geometric style was showing signs of exhaustion. It seems that the vase painters wanted to create something new. Following the geometric age came the Orientalizing period, when the Greeks were greatly influenced by the art of Near East. The Athenians, though they never ceased to portray scenes of daily life, were now becoming even more eager to recount myths in visual form. And this encouraged them to develop a new style. By the middle of the 7th century, Attic vase painters had almost entirely rejected the geometric style. They had replaced narrow zones by large pictures. They had begun to illustrate myths. A good example is this amphora, found in Eleusis and housed also in Museum of Eleusis. The Attic artist used both neck and body as fields for the narration. The figures are large. The scene on the body shows the hero Perseus and the Gorgons. According to the myth, there were 3 Gorgon sisters, only one of whom, Medusa, was mortal. These monsters had faces so horrible that a mere glimpse of them was enough to turn a person to a stone. They were literally petrifying. The hero Perseus was ordered to kill Medusa and carry off her head, a task requiring both ingenuity and courage. Athena, the goddess Athena, helped him, as she always did. She gave him a shield so that the hero used this metallic object as a mirror in order to avoid to look at her directly. As no picture of Gorgon was known, the artist was obliged to invent one. He tried to create an image worthy of the reputed ugliness of these creatures. He painted, we can see it, big-eyed Gorgons. Oh, and Julie, sorry. Here are the Gorgons, with gaping mouths and snaky hair. The sisters of Medusa, the Gorgons, turn their terrible faces towards us as they chase Perseus, whose flying legs are still preserved at the far right. And between them we can see the goddess Athena, who covers the hero's flight. The horizontal decapitated body of Medusa lies at the far left. You can see it here. Another mythological episode known from the Odyssey is told on the neck of the vase, so this area. It is the story of Odysseus and the Cyclops Polyphemus. Odysseus, one of the heroes of the Trojan War, was trapped in the cave of the gigantic one-eyed Cyclops. To make the story clear, the painter chose to illustrate the easily recognizable scene of blinding. The Cyclops is shown seated at the right, his great size indicated by the fact that, though seated, his head reaches at the top of the available space. To the left, three men are driving a pointed stick into his single eye. The leader of them is Odysseus. The Cyclops raises one ineffectual hand to try to push the pointed stick away. With the other hand, he holds a wine cup. The wine cup was introduced to make it clear that this Cyclops had been made drunk before the rest of the plan was put into effect. The painter was not interested in presenting one scene, but the whole story, using only 2 or 3 figures, persons. Though myths are represented in a lively way, the artist didn't bother about anatomy. From now on, and at the end of the 7th century, it was possible for the Attic artists to tell a story and to show elegant details through the adoption of the so-called black figure technique. The technique was invented in Corinth, not in Athens, but at the end of the 7th century was adopted by the Athenian vase painters. Figures drawn in black silhouette, we can see here the figure, or here. In black silhouette and systematically articulated by incisions that clarify their internal structure. Maybe you can see the incisions of this figure. This vase illustrates this. We have the same scene, Perseus and the Gorgons. So here is one Gorgon, but drawing in another way. The details are incised. The anatomical details make the figures more natural. We have more movement. The bodies of the Gorgons in Eleusis of the last period, if we want to compare them to them, look like a block of stone. There's no movement. The huge Attic vases of the 8th and 7th century BC that placed on tops as monuments were unusually both in size and in facture. But there were also vases that were normally made for everyday use. A small proportion was painted. Such painted pottery, a modest luxury, was generally used in one of 4 ways. As containers, at the top, here, as containers and storage jars of ample but not enormous capacity, we have the 2-handled amphora or pellikie. These are the amphoras. Here, usually, amphoras held olive oil or wine. Hydria, as the name indicates, was used for water. Here. The vessels were used as equipments of drinking parties, of symposia. Since the Greeks drank their wine diluted with water, they needed a wide-mouthed mixing bowl, and that was the crater. We have several of them at the bottom. And then they used also wine jugs in Ahoy to serve wine. This one. And of course they needed also drinking cups. These shapes. There were also vessels used in connection with personal hygiene and adornment, just like pyxes to hold cosmetic and trinkets, especially used by women. And there were also vessels for use in certain rituals, just like lekytos, this jug, to pour libations, and lekytos was also suitable as grave offering. One of the most famous of all Greek vases, today housed in the British Museum in London, is this Dinos, a mixing bowl. As this vase has no handle, the decoration goes all the way around the bowl. The decoration is no longer dominated by a few large figures. Instead, the surface has been divided up into narrow zones. The heart of the painter was in the mythological scene he portrayed at the top. We can see the wedding of the mortal Thessalian king Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis. These are the future parents of Achilles. The start and the end point of the zone is the house of Peleus. This is the palast, before which he stands greeting the 41 deities who approach him in a procession. They attended the couple on the morning after Thetis' first night in her new home. Thetis waits modesty. Some of the gods and goddesses ride in chariots, others are on foot. All of them are labeled. This basil, I hear some details. This basil is very important also for the scholars because the vase painter signed his name on it. He wrote, Sophocles με έγραψε. Sophocles painted me. And he wrote this here between the column and the corner of his palace. Sophocles is the earliest Athenian vase painter whose name we know. However, the vast majority of the painters is anonymous and recognized only by their style of drawing. In general, a very high proportion of figure scenes on Greek vases deals with subjects of myth. To understand the strong myth content in Greek art, we have first to realize that for Greeks, what we call their mythology was regarded as part of their history. A good example is the Trojan War. Homer wrote about this war 200 years before this vase was painted, but we see it's still interesting during the 6th and 4th centuries, also later. Many episodes depicted on vases show the need of the Athenians to connect them with their heroic past. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis was one of the great social events of mythology. We all know how important, also nowadays, is a social event, marriage, in a royal family. All the gods and goddesses were invited, except for Ares, the goddess of discord. In revenge, she threw a golden apple inscribed for the fairest of them all. The young Trojan prince Paris should judge who ought to receive it between the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each of them offered him political power, courage in the war, and the most beautiful woman in the world, respectively. The judgment of Paris is one of the most common scenes on Greek vases, starting around 640 BC. One of the earliest pictures of the judgment is depicted at this pyxis, at this vessel in Louvre. Here or here. Pyxis is a cylindrical box with separated lid. This is a 3-footed pyxis, and on one foot is depicted this episode. We can see the god Hermes. We can see Hermes conducting the 3 goddesses towards Paris, the 3 goddesses, and Paris is depicted on the right, alarmed, and tries to escape. We don't know why. Maybe he made off alarmed by the divine apparition. Paris chose later the Aphrodite, and Aphrodite called him the most beautiful woman of the world as wife, a beautiful Helena of Sparta, who turned out to be Helen of Troy. But she was already married with the king Menelaus. The kidnapping of Helen triggered the Trojan War, which lasted for 10 years. Many common were depictions with episodes of the Trojan War, as it was known from the epic poets, but also from other poets that were well known in the ancient Greek world. The first scene in Troy, after Menelaus, together with his brother Agamemnon, organized the war against the Trojan, was this scene, the ambush of Troilos by Achilles. An oracle had foretold that Troy would not be conquered unless the youngest prince, Troilus, would die. And Achilles killed him. One day, Troilus went out of his city to fetch water together with his sister Polyxena. And here is Troilus, and behind the fountain we can see Achilles. He's waiting for him, and we know he will pursue him, and he will finally kill him in a sanctuary of Apollon. Many combats between Trojans and Greeks are depicted on vases. Interesting is this one on the neck of one crater, and we can see combat between Achilles and Hector, in the presence of Athena, the goddess Athena, on the side of the Greeks, and Apollon. Hector, the prince, the son of Priam, killed Patroclus, the best friend of Achilles. Achilles was very angry, was sad, but also very sad and furious, and he couldn't find a quiet moment until he took revenge and finally killed Hector. And this combat, the last combat and the last moments of Hector, we can see here. But that was not enough for Achilles, and this scene on Idria shows the dramatic scene of Achilles dragging the body of Hector behind his chariot. So Achilles and the body of Hector. To the left, Priamus and Hecuba, the altern of Hector, and to the right we can see the tomb of Patroclus. There's also an inscription, and on it we can see the soul of Patroclus. And what happens then? We can see on this depiction in Vienna, in Kunsthistorisches Museum, we can see the ransom of Hector's body. Priam himself comes to Achilles, to the tent of Achilles, and to beg for the return of Hector's body. Here is Achilles, here is the old man and the king of Troy with gifts, and we can see the body of Hector under the couch of Achilles. At this depiction, we can see another episode mentioned by another epic poet, the Aethiopis. We can see the combat between Achilles and Penthesilea, or the death of Penthesilea at the hand of Achilles. This episode belongs to the later stage of the war. After Achilles had killed Hector, Priam asked the queen of Amazons and daughter of Ares Penthesilea for help. When she arrived in Troy, Priam hopes that she would defeat Achilles. She eventually met Achilles on the battlefield and was killed by him, and according to some sources, he fell in love with her as he did so. The composition here on this amphora is limited to the protagonists. Their crossing spears emphasizes the way the two look at each other. Does the intense eye contact between the two indicate that Achilles has fallen in love with her at this moment? We don't know. But let's move on to another episode. Numerous vase paintings have suggested a tale not mentioned in the literary traditions. Achilles and Ajax playing a board game. We can see it in this amphora in Vatican museums, Achilles and Ajax. They sit across from each other, looking down at a block situated between them. The board game they are playing might be compared to a backgammon. According to the words written next to the players, Achilles has thrown a 4 and Ajax 3. So Achilles is the winner. Although the two of them are pictured playing, they are clearly depicted as being on duty, accompanied by their body armor and holding their spears, suggesting that they might head back into battle at any moment. We can see over 150 depictions of this scene in the following 50 years. And for the people of Cyprus, for you, and especially for the people of Nicosia, fortunately, do not have to go far to see such a depiction, because there is a beautiful vase showing the same scene in Cyprus Museum. This is the vase, a jack and onochoe, and we can see this is the same scene. The heroes sit on blocks, fully armed. Achilles, on the left, moves his piece. 5 other pieces, I'm not sure if you can see them, are shown on the block, and Ajax is ready to make his move. We can see it is a pleasant break of the war. But the reality of war is this one. This scene depicted on this Idria in Naples, and we can see the sack of Troy, the downfall of the city. Mythological illustration served as a good vehicle to convey new ideas and new depths of feeling. This painter understood this well when he painted the sack of Troy on the shoulder of this Etria during the early years of 4th century. The downfall of Troy took place in the 10th year of the war. We know the episode with the Trojan horse. The horse itself is rarely depicted in Greek vase painting. If you take a more specific look at this depiction, you can see that the figures are not black anymore. This vase is dating to far 80 BC, and the vase painters have already used the new technique, the red figure technique, since 40-50 years ago. The red figure technique, at the bottom, was an Athenian invention of around 530 that became a dominant decorative style on Greek vases of the classical period. Red figure is, in a sense, the photonegative of black figure. Instead of painting black gloss figures on red or orange background and incising the details, in a red figure technique, the figures are outlined and left red and left red. The background is covered with black gloss and the details are painted. And a good example is here is the same vessel, an amphora, and this belonged to the first experiments of the vase painters. And they painted the one side in black figure technique, in the traditional technique, and the opposite side in the new technique. Here we can see the hero Heracles feasting, and Athena, the goddess Athena, is with him in the black figure technique and in the new. By the beginning of the 5th century, the anatomy of figures in action has been mastered, and its rendering was not such a challenge. But let's go back to the scene with the fall of Troy. In the center, Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, is killing the king Priam, who sits on the altar holding his bleeding head, not to protect himself, but in mourning gesture for his grandson. His dead grandson lays in his lap. To his right, a young, or maybe you can see it better here. To his right, a young Greek kneels and covers himself with a round shield against not a warrior but a Trojan woman who attacks him with a club. Here. This is Andromache, the wife of Hector. To the left of the central scene, here, we can see the rape of Cassandra at the Palladium. Cassandra was one of the daughters of Priam and Hecuba. She was a priestess, and we can see she's pulled from the statue of Athena by the lesser Ajax. On the left and on the right follow scenes that point from the fate to the better future. Here, and maybe yes, we can see it better here, this group. Aeneas, escaping with his father Anchises, and his young son Ascanius runs ahead. These three groups. And on the right, the sons of Theseus rescue their grandmother and mother of Theseus, Aethra. The group on the left side was of great importance for the buyers in Italy, since Aeneas was worshipped there as the founder of Rome. The picture reflects not only the rape, murder, sacrilege, but also the courage by the Trojan woman with a club and the hope by the figures on the two sides. This painter had ample opportunity to consider the message of his picture for the Persian attack on Athens in 480. The city was conquered. Athenians had to leave their homes and flee to the opposite island of Salamis. From there, they saw the destruction of Athens by the Persians, who set fire to their city. While the war was still in progress, the Greeks knew all its horrors. For the vase painters, emotions became more important at this time. Gods, and let's move on to another topic, gods and goddesses, as well as the most important heroes, are very often depicted at the vases in many ways. The most famous heroes were Heracles, like here, against the lion of Nemea, and Theseus, of course, the Athenian prince, and the gods as supporting figures to heroes or in their own right. We have also ritual scenes and libation scenes. Also here, on the left, we can see the goddess Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and fertility, who teaches Triptolemus. Triptolemus was the prince of the city Eleusis, in the ways of agriculture. And she provides him a winged serpent-drawn chariot to spread her gift across the earth. But a god's life was not always easy. They also had to fight for their own freedom. One of the biggest struggles came about when giants, children of G, the earth, decided to revolt against the Olympians. Their battle was a popular subject not only on Greek vases, but in general in Greek art. On one level, it represented the victory of cosmic order over chaos, and later, on another level, the struggle of the Greeks against real enemies, the barbarian Persians. And you can see this topic on this amphora. The center of the image, normally, as here, consists of the triad of Zeus, Athena, and Heracles. Heracles was mortal, but he took part because an oracle had foretold that the Olympians would not be victorious unless a mortal participated. So he helped the Olympians to win this battle. This group fills most of the scene on this black figured amphora. We can see Zeus with his thunderbolt and on the chariot, and Heracles and Athena. Athena raising a spear against the fallen giant. All the giants are outfitted as Greek warriors. And the same scene we can see at the fragment next to the amphora. We can see at this fragment part of the chariot team of Zeus, with Athena and the giant. This fragment is also in Cyprus Museum and derives from Agrokypia. And I think the same painter painted both of these vases. And we leave the divine world and move on to the human world, to the real life. Scenes of everyday life were becoming more popular in the late 6th century BC. There are scenes showing men, women, and children. Greek vase paintings draw on many aspects of ancient Greek life. Some of them are recorded in Greek literature, but others are known only from vase paintings. Life in ancient Greek was quite different for men and women. Whilst men were expected to take an active part in the public life of their city, women were expected to lead a private life as wives and mothers. Their lives were centered on home. However, they were allowed to attend weddings, funerals, and some religious festivals. And at this vessel, it is a Lekythos in Metropolitan Museum, we can see an activity, a women activity. On the body, we can see women are making a woolen cloth. In ancient Greece, even queens and noble women knew how to make cloth. Let's think to Penelope, the wife of Odysseus. Fetching water from a public fountain house was a good reason for women to leave their homes and go out. As we can see here at this Idria, the main scene shows 5 women filling their water jars, their idris. So we can see also the vessels depicted on the vessel. At a fountain house, Krini, from 4 lion-headed and 1 donkey-headed spouts. Here is the donkey-headed. These scenes were very popular on Attic black-figured Idrian during the last 30 years of 6th century. The popularity of such scenes had also a historical background, and they may reflect contemporary improvements in Athens' water supply. Aristophanes, the comedian, a little bit later, as this Idria was painted, points out in a comedy that women go to fountain houses more for gossip than for fetching water. Maybe both reasons are true. Women were responsible for growing up children. Pictures with children involved in several activities, including different types of play, make them one of our richest sources for Greek childhood. And on the left, we can see a child squirming in his pottery chair. And such pottery chairs have found at excavations. And on the right, we can see a crawling boy starts to make an attempt at standing. He is being encouraged by his mother, and behind him stands his father. It seems likely that the painter had seen these events in his life and been moved by them. For the Athenians, the education of young people, children, and especially boys, was very important. Athenian children were taught writing and reading, but also sport and music was part of their education. And we can see here in the so-called school cap, housed in Berlin, we can see a music lesson and a writing or reading lesson, also a man holding a book roll open. And on the other side of this cap, we can see also a music lesson, a young boy learn how to play pipe, and another here learn the young boy how to write. Athenians were proud of their educational system, and they wanted to show also on their vases. There is also an interesting scene, but in mythological context. On the one side, we can see a music lesson, but the young boy is Iphicles. Iphicles is the brother of Heracles. Iphicles being taught music by Linus. Linus is his teacher. The lesson has already begun. But on the other side, we can see Heracles goes to the lesson late, accompanied by his servant. Linus, who was admired because of his poetry and singing, had many pupils, among others Orpheus. According to the myth, he taught music as well as letters to the young Heracles. The boy was unable to appreciate what was taught him. While Heracles was touching the instrument unmusically, Linus reprimanded him for making errors and punished him. But the pupil flew into a rage and violently struck his teacher with his own lyre. That was Heracles. At this depiction, there is no indices of the crime that will follow. One is clear, that Heracles is not excited about the music lesson. He's late and he cannot even carry his own lyre. Music was almost a constant part of Greek life, whether for entertainment or as part of festivals and rituals. And very close to music was the symposium. The symposium was the Greek male drinking party, which took place after the evening meal, normally restricted to the elite. The party took place in the andron, the men's room. The men drank while recycling back on couches, clean. Just like this scene. Prayers and libations to the gods were made at the start, and then the drinking began, accompanied by various types of entertainment, including music and dance. Much of this was often supplied by hetera, female companions, who could also later provide sexual entertainment. The men would converse, sing, recite poetry, tell jokes, play games, but also philosophical discussions were part of a banquet. Let's think at the symposium, at this philosophical text of Plato, Symposium, and the philosopher Socrates was also there. That means a banquet could be much more than a drinking table. It was a social event very important for the daily life in Athens. Not surprisingly, many of the scenes showing such parties are found on shapes using at these banquets. We have seen the cup and also these vases. This is a stamnos, a mixing bowl, just like this. Very interesting is this depiction in Brussels. We know because we know the name of the participating person, of this person. His name is Mikros, and we know who is depicted on this vase. He is the vase painter of this vase. That means that we have to deal here maybe with the first self-portrait or selfie in the history of Greek art. The vase painter chose to portray himself as a member of a banquet, as a member of the aristocracy. I have tried to show you pictures on vases, and although they seem to be all the same, they are quite different regarding both shape and depiction. The vases were, for the buyers and viewers, their medium, and on them were shown scenes that were interesting for them. Very important is also that vase painting is, for us, the only art of painting survived until nowadays. Painted vases are an essential source for understanding of ancient Greek life. Interpreting this picture can be both complicated but also fascinating. That's why I'm very interested in Attic pottery and work on Attic pottery and its iconography, and I hope I will be able to do it also in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria, Dr. Christidis. In fact, this is also one of my favorite subjects. I think it is one of the favorite subjects of everybody. Somehow we can all relate to it. Actually, you have shown to us some of the masterpieces of Greek art that brings us back to our classical education, and of course the connection with the symposium helps a lot. But also the other myths. I mean, you don't have to be an archaeologist to know about the Trojan War. So this was a panorama, and we thank you for this. I would imagine maybe there are some questions if you would like to ask some questions or make some comments. Please. Yes.
Yes. Could I ask? We find Attic pottery in Cyprus and elsewhere, but is it exported from Attica, or is some of it recreated in Cyprus using the same artistic technique?
The Attic pottery was exported also in Cyprus. Not only in Cyprus, to the west, Magna Graecia. The most famous vases were found in Etruria and South Italy on tops. That's why they are so good preserved, but also on Cyprus. In Greece, in Asia Minor, and also in Syria and in Cyprus. So this is Attic exported pottery. What I've shown.
Recreated, I mean, copied in Cyprus.
The Cypriots tried to copy the Athenian, not only the Cypriots but also the Etrurians. But there's also black figured pottery made by the Cypriots, but it's not so good quality as the Athenian. And I didn't show you today. This.
Sorry for my silly question. I am not an archaeologist, I'm a doctor. Imagine we wouldn't have Ilias and Odysseus, and we would find this pottery. How would they stand opposite of them?
A good question. Not a silly question.
It's a silly question.
No, it's not. It's a good question. There are also other poets, except of Odyssey and Iliad. There are also the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles. We have information from these poets. Also Aristophanes pointed out the daily life, and some of the vases, the depictions, have also inscriptions, dipinti. These are very easy for us to identify the persons. But there are easy scenes. We can identify them easy, and many, most of them we cannot. We suggest. We only make suggestions. Yes.
I think we made the mistake of announcing the wine reception. If I may ask something then also. Most of the vases that you have shown are Attic but do not come from Attic. I mean, they were found elsewhere, mostly in the West. But some, as you told us, and as we can see in the museum, were found in Cyprus. What can you tell us about, very short, I know this is a huge topic, but particular myths or not in Cyprus?
I cannot answer your question. It's a difficult question. Maybe we should see the life, the ancient life in Cyprus. How did people live here? And then we can maybe imagine which function did these vases have. Most of the vases were found in Mario, in tombs. Well, these were the last function was offering in the grave, but
Enriched tombs, for example, or enriched tombs, for example. I could imagine.
But I think that these vases in Cyprus were used also before they entirely went to the tombs. And Inophore was, in my opinion, was used in something like symposium. Because, of course, such a scene with symposium was copied, was inspired. The Cyprus painters painted in their topic, in the pottery, black figured Cyprus pottery.
So I think we can. Just the last
I'm
question.
also not archaeologist, okay? So my question is maybe you will have to repeat things you've said already. So if I understood it well, the black figures on a red surface are older than the red figures on black. Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And Cypriot artists, they only made black figures on red.
Yes.
Probably because they were not so advanced, they couldn't make.
Maybe it
good
was very
copies.
difficult. Yes.
So it was difficult, and
The
clay
Turians.
maybe it's not so good. So, and what was the reason why they started making the red figures on black surface? Was it just fantasy, new experiment? Let's try something
I think
new?
yes. Yeah. Let's try something new.
Okay.
Yeah, and the black figure technique. We have shown there were the incisions with the red figure technique. The painters used only outline figures, and the figures were easily to paint, and for the painter was easily to show the movement.
With the black
And
ones,
in
black
the
figures.
red figure technique.
Okay. Thank you.